tonight's lecture, the second lecture. Yes or no? I love that it says got it, because trust me, I got it. Welcome to our second lecture in our 2022 lecture series. Before we begin, I just want to thank Paul Davis of Marble Harbor Investment Council for his generous sponsorship of our entire year's lecture series, as he always does. Thank you, Paul, for your generous support. And tonight, we are very happy to have a local favorite with us, Dan Dixey, who is going to be talking about his best-selling book, Growing Up in Marblehead, 1621 to 2021. You know, they say if somebody is well-known and revered, they require no introduction. So Dan, I'm just going to pass it right over to you.
Continue to pop up. Actually. Well, thank you. It's always a pleasure to do an in-person meeting and not sitting in front of my computer talking to myself on Zoom. So it's nice to see people here tonight. This is going out on Zoom, so I can't use my notes. So, and apparently I can't use my slides.
I'm happy to be your slide person if you need me to be. No problem at all. You just tell me when you, oh, is that you? That might be you. Go ahead and we'll find out.
Okay, let's see what it does. Yeah, just a little background. My the collection I have is I've got over 3,500 images now. I get new old stuff all the time to add to it. On Facebook is where most people kind of found out about me and my book and anything that I do, because I post thousands of pictures up there. And I'm kind of going to talk about the book, but I'm going to start. My favorite period in Marblehead is the first 25 years. So I've got a little bit about that. Obviously, there's no photos to go along with it. Then I jump to where I have the photos because that's what people like to see. So, you know. Yeah, absolutely. So here's some important dates in Marblehead, kind of the Marblehead history and the background. The first group, if we jump down to 1626, when Conant, who was supposed to be, you know, getting a settlement going up in Cape Ann, and it was failing, and he had seen Salem, thought it was a better harbor, the land looked better for planting, so he kind of moved down to Nonkeg, which was called at the time. Nonkeg consisted of Marblehead, Salem, Danvers, Beverly, part of Middleton. It was a huge area. It wasn't just Salem and Marblehead. And then they promised to send some ships over in 1629 to kind of help get the settlement going in the Salem area. And on that ship was one of my ancestors, William Dixey, was on that. Francis Higginson was a minister that he was coming over. He sent letters back to England. He kept a complete diary of the trip over and what they found when they got here, which was a great resource. And he was sending it over to England to entice more people to come over to the new settlement. A lot of people talk about in 1630 the Winthrop fleet. That's when 1,000 people come over, and they call that the beginning of the Great Migration. But really, those 5 ships that come over in 1629 were the original group. Allerton, who came over on the Mayflower, he was fishing out of Marblehead. He moved up to Marblehead at one point. In 1638, up on Old Burial Hill, which obviously wasn't called that because nobody was buried there. They built a meeting house at the top of the hill. And that's where the first preacher, William Walton, ended up being the first preacher in town. He was unordained. John Avery was preaching up in Newbury, and Marblehead tried to entice him to come down. And he refused the offer, and then he decided that he would take the position. And him and his family were coming down from Newbury, and a storm came up, and they actually all died. They Thatcher's rocks so they never made it to Marblehead. So Walton was for 30 years he was unordained, but he was the preacher. And in 1644, Thomas Dixey, who's also a direct ancestor of mine, he was running the ferry from Marblehead to Salem. There was no bridges built until 1640. So to get from Salem to Marblehead, unless you went across the water, you had to go all the way up to Vinton Square and then in from there. And the road actually went out almost to Highland Avenue, kind of with the railroad tracks. So it was quite a trek by horse and cart. So the ferries became a very important mode of transportation before they started building the bridges and the roads. Then the town incorporated in 1649. See the names of the first board of selectmen. And then in 1684, a deed was prepared. I actually added a slide after watching town meeting. Disclaimer: I'm not a voter. I'm not a taxpayer of Marblehead anymore. But the Article 32, which was about land acknowledgement. And when you read the article, it seems okay. I mean, they want to acknowledge. Well, they said the non-pays. It was the Pawtucket were the actual tribe. That they were the original, original dwellers. But of course, they weren't, because there's thousands of years history. So they took the land over from somebody else, and they kind of went on. But there was a deed prepared. Actually, 3 of my family members had signed they were in they formed a committee to see if they wanted to purchase the land to make it legal. They decided that they didn't need to. They didn't think there was any legitimate claim because the land was deserted when they got here. There was no permanent residents, Native Americans. So but they decided, yeah, let's do the deed and sign the deed so that we make it official. So that's how the deed came about. If it turns out to be not legitimate, I guess I can get reparations because my family paid for this town years ago. Okay, enough of that. Now these are some of my direct ancestors and names that you saw earlier: Allerton and Moses Maverick. Most of the first board of selectmen. William Walton, that first preacher, was my 9th great grandfather. Devereaux and Barrow, the Dollivers. So, and then the person talked about Thomas Dixey that ran the ferry from, it was right at the end of Green Street, went over to where the House of 7 Gables is now. And so the first few generations of my family lived on Nogg's Head. John Dixey actually named Nogg's Head. He called it Nogg's Head, and they put deposition, and they kind of transferred to Nogg's Head after that. And then they moved to 3201 Street. Captain John Dixey, he was my 4th great grandfather. There was Henry Dixey, captain at Circle Street. And then Middle Street, my grandparents lived on Nicholson Hill. We were living in Barnard Hawks Court when I was born. We were the first residents in number 14. My father was a veteran, very young veteran when he came back. And we moved up to Reed Street. And when I started doing all the research, my wife and I were living on Kenneth Road, which is right here, right at the end, across from the ferry. I knew none of this information, but it turns out the window where my desk was, I was looking out at the old side of the ferry, and it was all up the old Dixieland. So all of this was found up on Nogg's Head. John Griffiths, actually his father, and John, his daughter Gail, has this stuff. But we kind of had some experts looking at these things and dating them. They're all either tools or parts of the, when they were chipping and making arrowheads and all that. The experts look at these and they can date these things just by the way they form the arrowheads. But and this is one that Gail gave me. That's, you can see it's a pretty well defined arrowhead, and when you look close, you can see the way they kind of chip them out. The interesting thing is most of the ones that were found up there were dated to be a couple of thousand years old, not 400 years old. So I think the population of the Native Americans was real heavy at one time in Marblehead. And again, by the time the English settlers came in 1619, it was pretty much 90% of the Native Americans had been wiped out from disease. And then the Tarantines were the Native Americans that were kind of nasty. They were out of Maine. They were aligned with the French, so they had guns against these, spears and arrows. So they caused a lot of damage. And then also found up on August Head was this ring in 1949. Again, John Griffiths and on his property was digging in his garden. He saw something shiny. He pulled it out and he took it to it was the Marblehead Historic Society at the time, and the Essex Institute over in Salem, and they helped identify it as a mourning ring, piece of jewelry you got when somebody died. And it was for John Dixey, who died in 1737. Again, you saw the Dixey family was living up on August Head, so it made sense that that's where the ring was found. After Gail gave me this ring, I have possession of this, my most prized possession of all my Marblehead memorabilia. But it's quite a piece. I found the probate record that told the TS was Thomas Skinner. He was the goldsmith, the silversmith. And he actually made 14 of these rings for the funeral. It was paid for it. So if you look on August Head, go digging around because there might be 13 more of these gold rings. This is my father over in Germany when he was 19 years old. Next one. There he's sitting on a tank. And again, when he got back from the war, they were finishing up the Barnett Hawks Court, the housing, which was going to veterans, and that's how we get in. We get in there in the 1950s, I think 1950s when they opened. And there's my mother and father, my oldest brother who's skipped, and I didn't know he was going to be here. And that's outside me in the 1940s. How old are you? This was 1940s at my grandmother's house at Nicholson Hill. And there's the rest of the family. There's my oldest brother Mike and Janice, my late brother Dave, that's me. And again, that's at 14 Nicholson Hill. My brother Barry was too young to be in the picture, but he's up there. He was retired. He was Marblehead fire chief for 10 years. He retired. Now this is the house down on Circle Street. This is from an old negative I have. I love the holly, even in black and white. The hollyhocks look nice, and on the corner there, that's 21 Circle Street. This picture is taken from Abbott Hall. I've had this for years, and last year I found something interesting on it. But I always love the picture because it's one of the few that show the train and the trolley in the same photo.
Do you need to go back?
Yes.
So you can see that the train coming in. This is 1920s. You can see the new YMCA, which was built in 1910. Of course, that was torn down as the parking lot was a national brand now. But right here is 14 Nicholson Hill. That's my grandparents' house. And my father was born in that house, and probably around the time this picture was taken. And that outhouse was actually still there when I was born. That was still there in the late 1950s. My grandparents still had an outhouse. Can you imagine today trying to tell someone you're going to have an outhouse? This is the house at 6 Reed Street where we live. This is, I think, 1899, this photo. Interesting thing on this is these little 10-footers, they call them, little shoe working sheds that they had in the backyards. Those were all over town at one time. And that's just a close-up of it. That was still there. When we bought the house, that was there, but it was falling down and we were told not to go in there as kids. And remember, there was shoe making, little shapes for the heels and things that we would love to have today, but all that stuff got thrown away. My father tore down the shed. So this is down on Bessem Street, looking up. That little shed we saw was over here. But Bessem Street was a dirt road. They had the railroad. They had the freight yard where the trains would pull off to unload the cars there. They could unload the cars and load them up to something. This was a boat that was built by Graves, probably going on to a flatbed to be shipped off to whoever they built it for. And that's the railroad cross. That's Gilbert and Cole is still in that location today. And there was a railroad crossing. The trains were still running. They stopped running in 1959, 1960. So those were still running when we moved up to Reed Street. I remember brothers used to go down and put pennies on the track and flatten them out. He was always afraid the train was gonna tip over when they did it. It was never survived. So. And then there's another shot of the tracks going in, the old the coal building. You can see the track here, that's where it went off. This is Besson Street. It's Anderson Street. So the unload the cars into there, you can see when it's there. And then in 1960, it was a Friday night, we were watching the Flintstones, and it was a big fire at Gilbert and Cole, and it was amazing that they saved all because the houses are pretty close there. We were looking out the bedroom window and you could feel the heat on your face. We were afraid the whole neighborhood was going to go up, but it was only the cold buildings that burned, and they got the fire out in the middle of the morning. And at the end of Besson Street was Walter Williams, the dentist, was in there for a while, and then later on there was Nelson's funeral home was in there, and then it later became the village decorator. And again, this is right on the corner of Besson and Pleasant. These houses were taken down to make room for the village plaza. Probably Hutchie's Chips was right down there. And then when they were doing the village plaza, which I think opened in 1970, when they were working on it, that's the house that was on the corner. This is in the bottom floor now. They moved it back and they raised it up and put another floor underneath it. This was the village rug. That's where my father worked there. I actually worked, that was my first job. I think I was 12 or 13 when I was punching in on the clock. And, this was Peach's Pontiac on the corner. And over here, John Proctor built a car wash and laundry. And, you can see those were the first, yeah, January 1970, they were looking for help on the, I think just the lower level opened first, and those were the businesses that were in the village plaza. Village Farm is still there, right? But this is 1973. This was another, there was always grass fires being set in behind Gilbert and Cole. Right up here, this brown house, the window right up in here is where we watched the fire from. You can see how close we were. But and this is where Heritage Way is now. The old railroad tracks are here. You can just see the back of the car wash and laundry that John Proctor built on Besson Street. Silver Trail McGuire, and he had a little business out of the building there. He had 4 dogs that were very nasty, and he used to love to chase us from the coop. We used to walk by there every day, and he thought it was funny that his dogs almost bit us every time we went by. And some of the stores that were in town. This was Caswell's restaurant. This is up by, we're looking down, Village Plaza's over here now. So this is Unpleasant looking down. After Caswell's was Tony Lena's. Caswell started in the top building, and then they kind of added sandwiches and they moved up here. Before Caswell's, it was Sam Gale's for a number of years. Started out in 1860 as a grocery store, and then it became a lunch place and a coffee shop. In fact, it was still Sam Gale's when I worked at the Village Rug. They used to send us up there to get coffee. I was always afraid Ed Shin was the boss, and thought he was going to fire us because I was out getting coffee. But then we did the First National, the grocery store down where it's not Wicks anymore. Whatever's down next to the wharf. That's where that was located. We walk in. I know they had the coffee beans on the left-hand side. When you walked in, you could smell the coffee. They had the grinder and had all the coffee beans over on the left in the First National. And then kind of diagonally across on the corner of School and Pleasant was Osborne's, had the grocery store and a liquor store out front. And I guess the health department and Chamber of Commerce were upstairs in that building at one time, according to the windows up there. So
Sawdust on the floor, right?
Mhm.
Sawdust on the floor.
Yeah, socks on the floor. And then had Dill's with the 3 cods there today, and 3 cod takes the whole building. We had the North Shore News, and then Dill's restaurant that was started by Glover Broughton, Bill Broughton. And there's another another view of it. I think this was a little older with the, with that older sign. And then next door, you can see there was Marblehead submarine base. It wasn't a military base, it was a sandwich shop. And then next to that was Hutchie's Chips. And then you have the bowling alley down Sewell Street, Maple Lanes, or Lumpy Lanes is what the locals called it. And that's where the National Grand Bank offices are in that building today. The used car place next to it. And it's just one of the score things. The Graves, huge Graves family. I think they had a birthday party there, and Marty gave me this sheet saying that. So. And down Atlantic Avenue, we had Brown's Restaurant and Bakery, a popular place. We used to walking home from church, always go in there and get donuts on the way home. At Marblehead Real Estate, Lamont had a little shoe shop in there. I think this is 1970. House of Pizza was new. I think they opened in 69 or 70. Before that, Abby Mays was in there for a number of years. They did homemade candy and ice cream. And then it was, I think they sold out to Carter. Carter changed the name to Carter's for a few years before they closed up. Before that, it was Cooksy's Candy Kitchen. It had opened, I think, in the 1920s. So for the longest time, there was a candy store in that corner. And then my favorite store, Damon Tucker's, down on Atlantic Avenue. This is next to Mino's, is over here today where the gas station is. And we used to go in there when the Beatles first came out. They sold records in there, so you go in there and get all the Beatles records. And they used to have a thing with the top 10 charts and who was, you know, what was number one. I think it was all the Beatles and the Rolling Stones back then. Down on State Street, McLean's Fish Market. That's Norman Vincent and Bob Bartlett. And the Driftwood opened in 1960. This is 1968. They had a side window. You could get ice cream there at one time. You could get sandwiches. You could get takeout. They sold Coca-Cola sign. I guess they closed for the winter because on this slide it said there was a note on the door that they were closed until March or something. And I was in the Driftwood a couple of summers ago, and Colleen, the owner, says, I've got a sign upstairs, and I was wondering where that might have been. Maybe you know. She brought it down. As soon as I looked at it, I said, oh, I know that was, she thought it might have been hanging over the side window. I said, no, for 1 year, they had a Driftwood Dairy across the street. And there's the sign right there. So, so it was in that building in 1969. I think that's the only time they did it. And they just combined it and sold ice cream out of the restaurant. So they did no business. And then Lynn Marine Supply was there for a number of years. Again, this is Front Street. And a liquor store on the corner. It was Compass Liquors at that time. It was different businesses over the years. There's another shot of that one. That's what the art studios, and it's been in there for a number of years. This is State Street. You can see McLean's, and this is Front Street. The thing I love about this one is the signs, the big plastic Budweiser sign, the neon bottle liquors, and I can imagine if somebody went into the town today with a permit and wanted to hang that thing over the sidewalk where people would watch, what the reaction would be. And down on Orange Street, those Stanley's Fried Clams. This is when you, kind of near where High Street is, you go in and it's like the second or third building on the left. It's just a house now, but it was a restaurant there for a while. Then over at Denver Beach, Timmy's. You get sandwiches, cold drinks. Timmy Cahill ran that. I think he ran it for like 60 years. He got to, to have a business in the parking lot of the town beach. He was supposed to police the area, so he was kind of supposed to keep an eye on things. That's how he was able to keep that license for so many years. And then, yes, we had a McDonald's restaurant in Marblehead. You couldn't get a Big Mac, but you can win money when people bet you that there'd never be a McDonald's in Marblehead. It was. And this is a house now. It was on the corner of Pleasant and Smith Streets. Then this was the first Adams House restaurant down about at the foot of Franklin Street. It was this little shop. It actually started out as, it was Adams and Stone. And then I think the Stone is the same one that had Stone's restaurant next to the fire station on Franklin Street a few years later. John Adams ended up taking over this business completely. I think they started in 1890. This was 1896. I love the Moxie sign and the wooden barrels that they had. And then they kept expanding the Adams house, which was right over in this, that last building we saw would have been right over here. This is the entrance to Fort Sewell. And they expanded, they kept adding and adding. That original building held something like 15 people. And then they went to, they had 40 people and 60 people. They ended up with 300 with this, they called it the Adams House Annex. And these ladders, I think, were 30 inches high, again, lit facing the harbor, so people couldn't miss them. But there were actually two buildings in operation just to handle the demand. And then the last Adams house before it got taken down, and the big apartment building is there now, this stucco building. And you can see there's the barnacle next door. Now this is where the barnacle is today. It started out as a J.F. Snow's Ocean House, and then this one says a second, so that was, I guess, it's the son. And then when this closed up, they moved this onto Selman Street. It's a house, and we walk by there today and you can't identify it anymore. For years you could, because you could tell the shape of the building was the same, but it's been renovated so many times it's hard to pick it out. But this was moved over to Selman Street as a house now. And that's just a zoom in of the menu of that place. And that was probably, I don't know, maybe around 1920 or so, but it was like almost nothing there. Actually, the fish dinners were more than some of the other stuff at $1. And that was the barnacle. I think this was like 1950s and 1960s. It was kind of more of a takeout thing. I think they had a couple of tables in here. There's that stucco Adams House building. Then the Bioweed restaurant. This was on the corner of Dowling Street in Washington. This actually started where the Driftwood is today, and it was a tea room. And they started, I think it was even late 1920s. It was there quite a while. It's just this tea room. Then they sort of added to the menu, and then they moved up to this location. And they had Shirley Dennis Antiques. He was into antiques for many years. That was on Washington Street. You come in from Atlantic Avenue and start heading up towards Abbott Hall. It was on the left-hand side. And then Bob Goodwin's store. And this is on Washington Street. That's on the corner of Franklin Street. The fire station is just to the right of that. But lots of local stores all around town. You can walk to and stay in your neighborhood to get some drinks and smaller items. And this is down on School Street at Rogers Ice Cream. And these are Larry Hardwick gave me this picture because that's his grandparents. That's his parents. He's the Hardwick, and she was a Rogers, and they were right across the street from the fire station for quite a number of years. In 1949, it was a sandwich shop. Again, this is on State Street. It was across from McLean's. In the back of the building that where the yacht studio is on the corner of Front and State. If you look at the building, it still has this. There's not a door there. You can recognize the shape really hasn't changed in that building. And then Gordon's was down on Washington Street where Arnold Gallery is. And this is 1950. It was Harold and Elise Hammond. The creaky wooden floor is still in there. And next to the Lee Mansion, there were actually a lot of Browns that had grocery stores. It was hard to keep them straight, but this was Frank Brown Provisions. This was in the old Litchman building, which is now in possession of the Marblehead Museum, where they're doing the work in between. That's the Lee Mansion on the side. I just love the displays and how they had the fruits and vegetables on the sidewalk. Down School Street, Murphy's Hardware. That's where the blue canoe is today. And that's the old fire station on the side. That was, it was Murphy's Hardware. It was, I think it was Brown's before that. Rogers Hardware for a number of years. We were growing up, there was still a hardware store there. This is the Warwick Theater. Long before they split it off into twin screens in there, when the McNulty's had it. And he used to go and get there early and sit in these seats and unlock the door so all the friends could sneak inside. McNulty's caught on to that. I didn't do that, it wasn't me. Up on Village Street, the Germain Farm is kind of the last. It was a dairy farm, the last of the farms in Marblehead. And Village Street was all just kind of vacant land at one time. Henry Byers bought this property and built there's a brick house up there now. I think Byers Way is inside of it, but Henry Byers was a plumber. He was on Highland Terrace. They were our neighbors, and he built the brick house that's up there now, and we moved in there. I think that was in the 1950s or 60s. Then Finch's store. This is at the head of Dowling Street. This is on Washington. And, was a popular store. There's Alfred Smith, the milkman. They used to go around and deliver milk to the houses. And I remember them coming. When we were at Barnum Hawks Court, we had the little milk box, an ice box outside the door next to the garbage pail that you step on to open. And they'd come in and bring the milk in glass bottles, had the thick cream on the top and a little cardboard cap on it. In fact, on our walk today, Julio's there was a big truck down on Lee Street blocking traffic because you can't buy there. He was coming up from a house with empty bottles of milk. So I guess they still deliver milk some places, but it was a Julio's truck thing. And this is back on School Street. Again, this is where the hardware store was. See, that was when Brown had the hardware store. Again, where Blue Canoe is. And there was a plumber, modern plumbing fixtures in the window. And this was before it was made into a one-way. I think it was in the 1960s. It was a two-way street until I think it was like 1964 or 65. They made it into the one-way. They still had the traffic light on Pleasant Street, but they made it always red facing the way that you couldn't come out of them. My brother and I went into Howard's and we were getting, I don't know, some baseball cards. And a motorcycle come up and sat there and was sitting there laughing because the light never changed. He sat there for quite a while before finally he kind of got it pulled up. And that's Howard's News. It's funny, this picture, Rick actually took this picture for me as a now and then that I was doing. This was the now picture. Now it's a then. It's what's in a pet store in there now. And you can see Super Sub was sandwich shop. Ben Rhodes had Super Sub in there for a long time. There's a fire station in behind it. And you had Boardman's Bakery, which is, this is down in Townhouse Square, Market Square, right across from the townhouse. There's the business side, there's a little strip store there, but people used to, I remember Louise Martin Cutler told me that they used to take Saturday nights, you could bring your baked beans, you could bring your big pot down and they put it in their big ovens and they cook them overnight. So you come in the next day and get the cooked beans. Then this is Usher's over at Devereux Beach. Had a pretty busy beach day, but they had the parking on both sides because it was a dirt road. There's a gas pump in front of it. And also, you can't read on this. If I zoom in, I have this negative. You can read. They rented these bathhouses. You can see there's bathhouses there, and they also rented bathing suits. You can't really see it. There's a clothesline there, so I guess at least they rent the bathing suits out in between rentals. And then there was a restaurant. There was a restaurant in that building there. And of course, you got that's still there, and this is where Timmy's was after this date. And some of the gas pumps that were around town. This is 1959 down at Tucker's Wharf Transportation Company. There's some of the locals looking at a visiting yacht down there. And the pump, this is kind of next to the landing, this is Graves' property over there. And the Esso pump there, again, for boats only. And we have, this is Pleasant Street, Vine Street comes off here, Village Street is kind of behind the photographer. But there were gas stations on each side of the street. At the Flying A, you have this American over here. Armin Barassa ran that for a number of years. Skippy Owen had a Harley, he used to work there. He got killed in an accident over by Devil Beach. And this was 1970, a little later now, it was a Getty station. The sign says Ed Courtney had it. And of course, this is Rocket's got, I don't know if there's businesses in there now, whatever, if they rented out the Marblehead Flower House would be right over in there. That's Karen Fulton Peach, I went to school with her. And this was a fireman's parade down on Atlantic Avenue. We got the Amoco station with the real old style pumps, and must have been a big parade. It looks like they started down at Seaside coming down. Shoes grocery store was cut off in this picture, but that was right over here. Then there was Lenny Frost had a Shell station on the corner. I don't know what's in there now. Pay more attention. But this is Atlantic Avenue and Washington Street. You can see Brown's Bakery. You can see Phil's Mobile through the windows there. And they were I don't know, replacing the pump or doing some work on the pump. That's why the fire trucks did it. That was 1970. Then this you can see Texaco station. It was Dollar ran that, Lamo. Before that, it was Stevens service station. John Stevens ran it. You can just see the Gulf sign, the gas station at Charlie Lee's. At one time, we're Food of Four Seasons. There was a gas station there as well. And you can see the Eaton's. This was the Eaton sign. It was a gas station where Minos is. And there's Shoes grocery store. Bruce Hamlin shoe store. You're walking, there was a little wooden box on the wall with the lollipops in it. Jack Barry Real Estate. This gas station, this is the one where Armin Barassa later had it at Vine Street, and behind it, this is Pleasant Street. You can see the trolley tracks here that went all the way to Salem and split off and went to Lynn. And then this was where Phil's Mobile was, the last station in town, Atlantic Avenue. It was originally David Love's station. I think this barn in the back of his office is still there, and behind Jack Athens' office is right about there. And that's just a little clearer shot. That's a glass negative I have with the for that same gas station. I love the old cars in these pictures. And then we had the railroad depot, the main depot, which is where the National Grand Bank is today. This one was built in 1839 when they first opened the railroad. Started out, it was just a Salem branch. The town actually wouldn't go for the Lynn branch. They didn't want to spend the money, so the railroad had to come up with all the money to put the tracks in and run the line to connect it to Lynn. And of course, the tracks split off under a little bit past the Village Street Bridge is the Y, and it goes off to Salem and then goes to Swampscott and then to Lynn. And then in I think this one was built in 1870, 71 or 73. Pretty the fanciest of all the depots. Again, this is down on Pleasant Street. The National Grand Bank sits on that property today. And you can see all these wooden buildings, a lot of shoe factories. There's quite a few large shoe factories all in that area. In June of 1877, there was a big fire, and everything you see in this picture was burned down. So they lost the depot and all the shoe factories. So they all had to rebuild. In 1877 and 1878, they built it back up again. And then this is the one they built after the 1877 fire. A little bit simpler, not as fancy of a design. I love they had the wagons out front that you get off the train and they take you down to Tucker's Wharf or wherever you're going. The little vendors selling whatever. But and then 1888, there was another huge fire that wiped out that entire area again, all of the shoe factories, the depot. The town came out with an ordinance after that fire that any multi-story buildings in that particular downtown section had to be brick. So a lot of the Rockaway building, the hardware store with Blue Canoe, the Gregory block where Tony's Pizza is, and that's burned since. The fire station, all of those were built during that time, so they had to be brick at that point. So you can see that was the final depot. It was brick. There's the Rockaway building, which is still there. It was a 5 and 10 little hardware store. You can see the trolley tracks. The trolley went all the way down Southern Street. So if you get on and get down all the way down, if you're going to walk down the Fourth Silver, you can get right off the trolley from there. And, because this was all built up, and after the railroad closed and they tore down the building, they took all of that down and they put stores. And that's where there's a little plaza in there now. On the corner of Spring Street. And this was Devereux Station on Devereux Street. As you heading where it split off, and then it would stop and pick up and drop people off. The track was in behind that building there. And this is the Clifton Station, which was very close to the Swampscott line. And it was actually Beach Bluff Depot was at Swampscott, but was right over the line. I think you could probably see both stations from one place that were pretty close, but that was the last stop leaving town before it went through Swampscott and then on to Lynn and Boston. And some street views around town. This is Village Street. This is probably about in front of where the school is, the driveway next to the school. And this was all Nickerson land. There was kind of ponds. In fact, when I was a kid, there was somebody drowned in one of the ponds up there off of Village Street. You can see they have the 2 water tanks. This one, of course, is on now too. But the original water tank was up at the end of Vine Street, and then they put the bigger one up at Tower Way, and then that was just removed like two years ago, I guess. And you can see it was all pretty much open land in a dirt road. And Laurie Clark planted, I don't know, 1940 something, I think. I planted the trees up there like every 50 foot. They planted all the trees on Village Street. So. And down on Pleasant Street, the Riptide's over where the Ford dealership is. So this is 1920s. Again, you can see the trolley tracks in the middle of the road. And actually, the Gill's restaurant, Glover Broughton had applied for a license when this Ford business was closing up. He wanted to put in a pool hall, and they wouldn't allow it. So he just scrapped the idea, and then he opened the restaurant several years later. But there were quite a few pool halls in Marblehead. I got pictures of the various ones. So this is Guernsey Street in Jersey, Cows Corner. And this is Elm Street, looking up the funeral home would be up here, the school. I always say roads and Story get mixed up. Story School is up there on the right, which is residential units now. But there used to be a big Harris shoe factory. It was on this corner where this house is. This brick building in the back where I think Henry Christensen, the cop, lived in there for a while. That was actually the equipment room to the shoe factory that was there. And that shoe factory survived both the 1877 and the 1888 fire, but it burned down in the 1890s in its own little fire. So and that's what it looked like. That was the shoe factory that was on Elm Street. And this is down on Franklin Street, kind of diagonally across from the fire station. You had around town, you had all these pumps, and they had the trough to keep full of water for the horses, because everybody had the horses going around town. So they keep water in there for the animals, and people come and pump. And I got quite a few pictures that have these in it all over town. One time there was one right outside the townhouse too. A couple of real big changes in Marblehead were This was the Rockaway Hotel. This is 1906. It was built in 1901. It had 100 rooms. It was very, very popular spot for tourists. Some people would rent it to come for the whole summer and stay there. You had the beach and, they could go out there, they could bring them down. And that was for quite a while, and it changed hands a few times over the years. And then by the 1960s, it was deserted. And you could see it when the windows were out and it had been empty for a while. And there's the anchor, which is still there on Gregory Street. Then in 1965, the wrecking crew came to take down the building. I think it was Neptune Wrecking Company was the one that did it. So. And then they started putting the town had an opportunity to buy that property. And I think it had to be a 2/3 vote, and it was very close, but they didn't want to spend the money. So, the developer bought it for Glover Landing condos. And in 1966, they started building the condos. They did a lot of work. My father did carpet work, and we did a lot of work, and those were new. I remember a realtor that was down there saying that there was water views from every unit. I think one of them we had to hang upside down from the skylight and look out just right to see the water. But every unit had water views at that time. And this was part of the Cirrhosis Farm. A lot of people think the Cirrhosis Farm was just where the current high school, and that's where these buildings were. As kids, we used to play, the foundations were still there. They were pretty high walls, but we were kids when we were here. And we used to walk around on the top of those. People would make little forts in there. But the Cirrhosis Farm actually was like over 400 acres that they had. It went almost all the way to the Salem line. They were on the other side of West Shore Drive, and it was all different parts of the farm. And that closed. That went bankrupt. I think it was in the 1930s. It opened in like 1918, 1919. It was after Little had a shoe factory in Lynn. He's the one that had this property. It was actually called the Military Farm originally. I think they had kids out of high school that were going to be going to the military, and they found a way to get cheap labor or something and had them work for it. So. And now where the Mariner project's going now, this house was still there when I was a kid. This was taken down in 1960 something, but there were these twin Victorian mansions at the top of the hill. These stairs are still there, and the owner assures me those are staying during this project. And the building, the corner of this is supposedly where the corner of the new building is going to be, and then the corner of the other building that was up there is the corner of the new building. He's very much into the history, which is good, and he wants to kind of superimpose something on the building of we're trying to find a picture of both of those mansions in one photo, and I've only got distant ones, and that was the one on the right-hand side. The one we just saw was over here, and then there was this one. This had major renovations. Oliver Killen bought these properties. He didn't buy them both at the same time. He bought the one on the left first, then he bought this, and he started converting them into apartments. So I think he tried to put 12 units, and the town would only allow 7, so put 7 units in here. 2 years later, he was able to put a couple more. He put units in, several units in that first building we saw. The garage barn behind that one, he converted into apartments. So I think he had 20-something units at the time he was done. He actually, before they tore this was the yellow apartment building. It was renovated, so you could barely recognize it. There was a couple of corners you could tell. But some of the pieces they took off of this were down in the basement, and they salvaged that stuff when they tore this down to do the Mariner project. There was also a bag of negatives, which I have at my house, that Killen had taken in the 1930s. We're hoping there's a couple of renovations of this, but there was mostly just family photos. But I'm still kind of going through those with the owner and try to find some interesting shots. So. Then coming in, the old lead mill building, coming into Marblehead on Lafayette Street. That's his conservation land now in there. But for a number of years, and that goes way back in history when they had the lead works there. the grocers ended up renting this building for a while. Some of the local, to compete with the big grocery chains, they kind of got together and they rented this for storage. What better place to store groceries than an old lead works? And then in 1968, they had a fire and burned to the ground. We actually went over we watched it from Loring Avenue in Salem. You could see it from right on the little Lakes Hill, little bridge there off of Loring Avenue and watch that burn. It's just another, I just got, a couple of months ago, I got something like 30 slides. This was one of them of the fire that somebody gave us. And that's all that was left next day. It just removed that. Like I say, that's it's just conservation. And then a couple of proposals went in there, but for the cleanup and all that, everything failed. And now I guess it's going to be open space forever. Well, it's not. And if you look, John Griffiths, he's one of the, Naga said, he's the one that found that gold ring that they have. But he was a character. One of my favorite stories. He was a volunteer over at Salem Hospital. He used to run a pie contest all the time, but it really wasn't a pie contest. He just like pies. So the nurses and a lot of the room there, he'd go in and he'd collect all the pies, and then he'd tell them all they didn't win to try again next year. He went around, and I have those that I just thought I could borrow a player to play on the little tapes. He used to go around his car, and he's got Betty Hunt and Louise Martin Cutler, and a lot of these old characters, and they talk about Marblehead, and he recorded it all. They drive around his car, and he had the recorder on the seat, so I have to digitize and try to, in my spare time, record all of those and see what's on them. So, and Mary Tutt, she could always be seen around town. She had binoculars and a little notepad, and she lived on Maverick Street, so it should be outside the library at that light, but a lot of times over at the corner of Ocean and Atlantic Avenue, should be on the corner there. And I think if cars were speeding or they're through the red light, she had the binoculars that should write them down. I guess she turned in her report to the police station every week. And Tony, Clarence Stone, he was a town character. He was kind of homeless for a while, but people, a lot of the families in town took care of him. But he used to like these. Here he was supposed to be ended. That's the depot that was being torn down in 1960, and he raised his bottle to tearing down the station. But he raised his bottle a lot for things. He used to lead the parade, and he had this fire shooting act, alcohol, whatever, and the thing, and light it and shoot fire. I think he caught his beard on fire one time. But, and he put Betty Hunt and Fred Bauer. This is up at one of the encampments up at Fort Sewell. It took this probably 20 or 30 years ago. And then Bowd Osborne, he used to do these slideshows. That's how I really fell in love with the old Marblehead pictures, was going to his. I took this picture in 1991. He used to do these presentations. We had to do it the old-fashioned way with a slide thing and a stick to point things out. And imagine what he'd do with the technology today. But he had a huge collection, which the town has a lot of that stuff now. Louise Martin Cutler, she was a character. They're giving the Marblehead salute. I used to sit down and talk to her. She was great story. She was a wealth of information. And she was a lot of fun to talk to. She knew how to tell a story. So you can tell. Yep. And Link Fox is down at the State Street Landing, local photographer. She's still in town. But Link was quite a character with his bull. And he took it around. I guess he took it into the landing. I think he took that into more than one bar, but he used to parade. This was on election day. And then he got this barn. The red barn that's up at Red's Pond used to be on the other side. This is 1965, so he had it, but he had to move it, so he's going to move it to the other side. So his original plan was actually to do it in the winter and take it across the ice, but he figured that probably really wasn't the best idea. So he concocted this moving device. You can see it just got barrels and some pallets and wood and built that thing, and then he floated across. I'm sure that was OSHA approved device. The funny thing is when he moved it, he had a winch that pulled it over, but he went out there in his dory and he put a rope on it like he was floating. People are taking pictures of him. But he winched it over and it still sits on the other side. It was at Red's Pond Boat Works, it's over there. And these are just a few from my glass negatives. The glass negatives are huge, so the quality of these is incredible. They were done with a professional photographer. They always use the tripod. They use the big box cameras. They put the glass. I have over 1,000 of these glass negatives, mostly taken by Fred Lichman. This is 1898 down on Dowling Street. It was Aiken Brothers lunch, and Lockerbie's was in there later. Ronaldo's restaurant actually started in here and then moved to the Village Plaza. There's Finch's store that we saw earlier. Because it was still mostly dirt roads in town then, little dogs sitting in the shade over there. And this is 1906, a view of the harbor, some of all the old wooden boats. You can actually see the lighthouse is just buried in the mast there. You can see the lighthouse in the background. And they used to have the New York fleet used to come to town. I don't know if it was like every 3 or 4 years. And they do races and they decorate all the boats. So this was one of the years that the New York fleet was in town. And so I had all the flags and the extra decorations on the boats. And this was on Elm Street. Just there was the negative was marked Neptune play out because it's 1902. They used to test out because that's how they put the fires out in town. They have the old pumpers that they use in the busters now. And they'd have to test out the equipment, so they take it different places. And this was on Elm Street. You can just barely see. There's the handle of it. There's such a crowd that the actual pumper is kind of covered up. And they'd go to fire. If there was a fire in town, they used to have the insurance plaques on a house to show that you were insured and who the insurer was. And whoever got there first, because these were all private. I think there was only one hand tub that was owned by the town at one time. And whoever got there first to get paid, so they had the insurance thing and make sure there was insurance before they were going to do any work. And but I thought that was pretty interesting. And this is Fort Sewell in 1898, the last time that it was actually manned as a fort during the Spanish-American War. I don't think there was ever any shots fired from Fort Sewell, but just a little display of being there. And then this is 1898, that's the causeway looking over towards the neck. It was the Portland gale. It was this big storm, and I think it was in November. And they called it the Portland gale because it was a steamship going from Boston to Portland, Maine. It went down. I think it was 200 people on it that all died, and quite a lot of other casualties too from that storm. I guess the storm came up suddenly and nobody was prepared for it. But you can see it made a mess of the causeway. And this is, I think this is 1898. That's at Crocker Park. A couple of I think those helmets were actually new that year too. But it's Eustis and Brown. This is Brown. This is Eustis. And this is a glass negative, and they're so sharp that if I zoom in, you can see it says Chief on his hat, and there's a number 5 on that one. And this is a Burgess Curtis seaplane that they were building in Marblehead. I think it started in 1913, 1914. Burgess, he had a contract with the Wright brothers. He was the first one licensed to build Wright brothers planes, but they had to build them to exact specifications that the Wright brothers had. But he wanted to do seaplanes and put the pontoon in the bottom, so he modified the design against the contract. And he got away with it for a few years. They ended up, violating the contract, but they built planes. They tested them out of Marblehead Harbor and some other places. They took them, and then they had a big fire. They had a huge factory down at Gas House Beach, and then they had one down at the end of Redstone Lane. They had the 2 factories. And in 1918, there was a big fire at the Gas House Beach one, and they never rebuilt. The war was over. They were building a lot for the war. There was more competition, so they closed up the business in 1918 after that fire. And that was a a football team. I think this is early 1920s. I think McGinnis was the coach. But these were the full uniforms. You can see the leather helmets that they wore, a couple sitting on the ground there. The padding looks like it's just cloth padding that was stuffed into the pants and the shoulders. And they played the games at Seaside Park. This is down at Seaside. You can see the grandstand in the back. And there's a baseball. This is 1914, again at Seaside Park, before the grandstand was built. It just had a wooden backstop propped up like 2x4s or something. But the town used to, any kind of sporting events, any parades, whatever they had, the whole town would show up to these, all dressed up, and look at the women in the long white dresses. All the men and boys had ties and hats on, lined, pretty good crowd there. You can see a combination of new motor vehicles and still a lot of horse-drawn carts that were being used. That's the old Catholic church that was at the where the apartment building is at Prospect and Roland Streets. In 1920, I think it was 1923, the church owned all that property, the Catholic church, and they built the new church is right down here now, and they tore that one down. They outgrew it. Everybody thinks it was a fire, but they actually just outgrew it, and these churches always have too much money, so they built a new church down there. And this was 1917 down at Seaside Park. Mike Grady on the end. You can see everybody dressed up to go to a game. They filled the bleachers. And this was 1917. It was soldiers getting ready. This is the townhouse steps. Soldiers getting ready to go off to war. You can see the families there to see them off. And they go and get on the train and they'd ship off. So. This is 1914. It was a big flood down Chestnut Central Commercial Street area. You can see this is Seaside Park over here. Atlantic Avenue is out there, and that whole area was flooded. They put new drainage. I have a couple of glass negatives of them in kind of over in the start of the parking lot with it all dug up and the drainage. It's just from a real bad rainstorm that flooded. There's an outhouse sitting in the middle. So if you live on any of these streets and you get a little water in the basement, consider yourself lucky. And this is one of my favorite glass negatives. That's from 1898. This is in front of Fred Litchman's photography studio on State Street, where Maddie's is today. He was upstairs there. And I'm sure these girls would probably get dressed up for the photo and didn't ride around that way. But the women dressed up like that, that is the way they dress. So, and that's, I got the 3 books that I did. The new one has a lot of detail. Some of the stuff we covered. It's basically a 400-year history, and that's when my family got here in 1629. So I kind of just paralleled it with that, but lots of facts. And that's a shot I took last year with my drone from up over where we're staying on Harris Street. There's a townhouse. So, and that's it.
Yeah, does anyone have any questions for Dan?
There's certainly enough fires through the years, wasn't it? So
Yeah, that downtown area got hit bad. And always been a concern in town with all the old wooden buildings being so close together. So, but yeah, that was major. Those 2 fires were certainly changed. They didn't rebuild all the shoe factories after that. It was, they just done it 10 years earlier, and I think with competition and stuff, they were probably not. But there was my pictures of the street, what was on there, and it's just massive buildings that were there for shoe factories down on Pleasant Street. So.
Did the Leslie Hotel burn down or was it knocked down?
I don't think there was a fire at the Leslie. I have pictures of them tearing it down, but I don't think there was a fire there. I think it just got sold off and closed up and sold off, and that's where Leslie was. Where Leslie's Cove and the units are in there now. That was once an inn, a hotel. It was called lots of different things over there. I think I got a lot of information in the book about the list with the dates. So.
Any other questions for Dan? All right, before we go, I have to take this moment to do a quick a quick shameless self-plug for the other events that we have coming up in May. On Saturday, May 14th, from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m., we're going to be doing our annual spring fair across the street in the Lee Mansion Garden. We'll have several businesses with booths there, as well as some family-friendly activities in the lawn. On Thursday, May 19, 2 weeks from today, another local favorite, Bill Conley, will be speaking here on his book, Marblehead's Waterfront. And finally, on Friday, May 27 and Saturday, May 28, we have a very unique program for you. We have a pianist named Daniel Maltz, who is coming all the way from Vienna, Austria to be with us. And he is going to be performing a piano concert in the grand parlor of the Jeremiah Lee Mansion. He's going to be performing the greatest hits of Mozart and Haydn on a reproduction 18th century forte piano. So it will be the same type of music that the Lee family would have heard on the same type of instrument. It's really a one-of-a-kind experience. And tickets for all of those programs are available on our website on our upcoming programs page. Otherwise, thank you all for joining us tonight.
Thank you.